Larry Haber, a reformed yet long recovered developer and now managing partner of the Commercial Real Estate Department of AGMB Law, as well as a non-practicing CPA and the creator of Leasing Reality, conducts an ongoing series of conversations infused with rock and roll, hip-hop, sports, pop culture, and historical questions with real estate and other business rock stars, designed to empower aspiring, emerging, and seasoned professionals and business owners to build a better foundation for both today and tomorrow.
Today we have with us a native New Yorker, someone who has earned a multitude of degrees. The first one being that of street smarts, pounding the pavement of New York City, followed by a degree up in Beantown in psychology from Boston University, an MA in sports management from NYU, and then in community service, including his 9 years as a senior member of the management team, which helped establish Chelsea Piers as what I think is the third largest tourist attraction in New York City. And then, in line with the Muhammad Ali mantra, service to others is the rent you pay for your time here on earth, by serving as co-chairperson of the Union Square Partnership and treasurer of the Village Alliance, among many other community-minded endeavors, which, by the way, he has been honored. Yes, my real estate brethren, I am honored to have with us today Bill Abramson, the Director of Brokerage for the renowned full-service management and brokerage firm Buchbinder Warren. How are you today, my friend?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for those kind words, Larry. I'm joining you here from my office with a couple colleagues, Matt Olden and Dan Rodriguez in the background, but they promised to be quiet. Of course, they will chime in if I say anything that could get us all in trouble.
No, none of that, my friend. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to start.
Before we start, I just wanted to thank you, right? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Also, I want to set a couple goals for this conversation, right? One is I want to have fun. I saw some of your questions. I know we're going to have fun, so I'm committed to that, and that should be pretty easy. I also want to try to empower and motivate some of the people in your audience or our audience. And finally, hopefully, we'll be able to learn or educate someone on something that they may not already know.
Exactly. Education is, is just so important. I use this line many times, but there's a song by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and it says knowledge is my part to it, but it's the power of equality. Okay, so hopefully we're going to spread a little of that today. So let's get right to it. I'm going to start with the great restaurateur, Danny Meyer, who, in addition to his groundbreaking restaurants in New York City, created a little something called Shake Shack. And he once said, life is a series of waves to be embraced and overcome. The reggae artist Jimmy Cliff, who I was lucky enough to see last year at Jazz Fest 2019, definitely a bucket list thing to go to in New Orleans. He has a great song, and it's called Positive Mind, The World Is Yours. So, Bill, both pre-COVID and today, how big a part does having a positive mind play in allowing you to embrace, and overcome the waves of business and life that seem to be thrown your way every now and then?
Sure. So, listen, you mentioned Danny as being a great restaurateur, but there's an old phrase we have in Italian. We say it's a mensch. Not only is Danny a great restaurateur, but as you mentioned, I co-chaired Union Square Partnership, and he was the chairman before me. And this is a guy who's obviously built up a successful, hugely successful hospitality business. And no matter when I reach out to him, no matter where he is in the world, the guy gets back to me. So when I try calling someone, they may not call me back or they're too busy. I think, here's a guy, Danny Myers, who's, as successful as they come. He always finds time. And I always keep that in the back of my head. So not only is he a great restaurateur, but also a real mensch. So I wanted to throw that in there. So to get to your answer, part of your question, I think, how do you keep positive? I think I'm unquestionably an optimist, and I think most brokers are optimists. It's just in the nature of the business. I think you have to be. But I want to take a little bit deeper cut into this. So I have 5 rules in life, right? And one of them is to set goals, right? You're not always going to be happy. You're going to have ups, you're going to have downs. But But I think the goal in life is really to live a fulfilling and exciting life. You know, if we look at traditional psychology per se, we are in the present and who we are today because of our past experiences we had, you know, when we were 3, 4, 5 years old, determine who we are today. That voice inside of our head. And if you're a Jewish guy like me, it's usually in the voice. It sounds like our Jewish mothers, but that voice inside our head really is what determines who we are. And having a background in athletics, I was a jock when I was younger and got recruited to college for wrestling and then played rugby in college and for many years after. If you're into athletics and you phrase your questions in musical references and arts, I usually frame my answers and questions in athletics. So if you're into athletics, you know, you set a goal. So let's say you're running a marathon. You plan to run a marathon. That's in November, right? You don't start training for the marathon in October, right? You start in June. You start doing 5 or 6 miles in June, and then you move to 10, 12 miles, and by September, October, you're doing your 18, 20 miles, and then you're ready for the marathon, right? So by having a goal, who you are today and who you have to be today is called forth by your future, right? So instead of living by who you are in the past or who you think you are, or who that voice tells you are, you're not good enough, or fear of failure, fear of success, whatever voice is going on. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if we keep quiet for 5 seconds, that voice that's saying, what the hell is he talking about? That voice. Well, if you call yourself, if you have a big enough goal and you call yourself to be someone bigger than who you are today. So I think establishing a goal is very important. And I'm not talking about, there could be short-term goals, but I'm also talking about 5-year goals, 10-year goals.
Well, there's no question. We all need structure, okay? And we need something to shoot for. There's no question about it. It helps, you know, and in this business, it really helps.
Right. And once you have that goal, whatever it is, it could be very short term, like doing this deal. It could be becoming a director. It could be whatever that is, starting your own firm, right? As soon as you create a goal, what's the first thing that shows up, right? Breakdowns or upsets, right? Simply because there's a distinction. You didn't have that goal. If you're driving along the highway and you're looking around, you see cars, they're just cars. Maybe you know it's a Ferrari, maybe you know it's a big 18-wheeler, but then you say you want to buy a car. Suddenly you're looking at cars a little bit more. Then you decide you want to buy a Toyota. Suddenly you see every single Toyota on the road because you have this distinction, you have this goal. So as soon as you have a goal, the first thing, whether it's running the marathon, first, maybe get an injury, you hurt your ankle. Or if you want to be a director, first thing, the deal doesn't happen. Or maybe you lose the job where you are now. So the first thing that shows up is upset because you have these new goals and suddenly there's new distinctions that appear in your life. But, you know, life has its ups and downs. If you didn't know sadness, you wouldn't know happiness, and vice versa. If you just were constantly happy, I think in EKG, that's called death, right? If you're just flatlining. So I think the key is to really, in order to stay positive and in order to embrace the present, we have to have a vision and a goal that's big enough and exciting enough for us to live into. And I think that'll keep us positive, and at least it'll lead to a fulfilling life.
Oh, there's no question. Listen, the bottom line is if you know, listen, my rose-colored glasses that I wear are tainted with the little thing called reality. I've said that more than once on this podcast. But, you know, if you go around life being, no offense to Nikki and Debbie, but if you go around life being a negative Nikki and a Debbie Downer, you know, life is going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy of something called SHIT. Okay, so moving on from there. During the height of Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA craze back in the 80s, he used to end a lot of his shows by saying, remember, nobody wins unless everybody wins. So given the myriad of conversations that are taking place every day between landlords and tenants when it comes to, we'll call it lease restructuring, being thrown a rental relief lifeline, how much, if at all, has, you know, this foregoing plea by the boss played into your lease restructuring negotiations the past, whatever, 6 months or so?
Well, listen, nobody wins if the tenant vacates, right? Especially these days. And I think there has to be some sort of partnership between the landlords and the tenants. If the tenant vacates, obviously the tenant loses money. Their employees are now unemployed, looking for a job. Landlords lose. It's going to take them a while to fill their stores again. They're going to have to give new concession. They're going to have to pay a commission. They may even have to pay TI. And so it's going to cost them time and money. And of course, the neighborhood loses and the city loses. So the goal, obviously, I think, is for both the landlord and tenant to work in a partnership and figure out what works. Now, these are unprecedented times, right? No one in our lifetime has ever experienced something like this. Us and several other landlords that I speak to on a fairly regular basis are using several things at our disposal. Obviously, a lot of our retail portfolio is small, 800 to 1,200 square foot stores in the Village or in Chelsea. And we have tens of thousands of square feet on Madison Avenue too, which get world-class, tenants. But most of the smaller stores lean towards the mom and pops, right? So obviously you treat a mom and pop a little different than you would a global brand that has very
no question about it. In the beginning, when people were the bigger people, the bigger entities were just saying, hey, the world's going to hell in a bucket, and they were taking advantage of it. That's not the people that you're concerned about. It's the mom and pops, because that's the bread and butter.
Right, exactly. So for those type tenants, the mom and pops, if you will, I think you just have to give free rent, or at least decrease the rent. Maybe you get it back. Maybe you amortize that over, the next 2 or 3 years, or extend their term a little bit. But you have to work with them, because at the end of the day, you really want them to succeed. And we vet them very closely. We meet with each of our tenants before we put them into our stores. So we get to know them, right? So that's one, obviously, one vehicle we could use is the free rent. For a global tenant, maybe you get free rent as well, but you're definitely getting that back over amortizing over the next couple of years.
Oh, yeah, no, exactly. Listen, the bottom line is life is a trade-off. But when I was on the landlord side, I never got when other landlords wouldn't. You got to play the game a little bit. I mean, the part of the problem that we're having these days, a lot of people don't have the necessary empathy for the person sitting on the other side of the table. Landlords have their own suitcase full of troubles, as do tenants. And the bottom line is you have to be sympathetic to each other's plights, because remember, every landlord, no offense, to the relateds of the world, but the bottom line is most landlords are not related. Okay, not saying that they could absorb it. They got their own financial constraints. But, a lot of landlords are mom and pops, and that's how they live. So it's, empathy is very important in all this.
And the landlords have their own obligations, right? They still
obviously, they got to keep the lights on.
They have to keep the lights on. They have taxes. They may have financial obligations to the bank, some more than others. I mean, if you're long-time holders like us that are low leverage, you've been around 60 years, less of an issue. But if you acquired an asset in the last 5, 7, 8 years, it's a whole different story. So, so it really depends on how you're leveraged as well. But I think the point is that landlords have their own obligations as well. And I understand no one's crying for the landlord. I mean, that's certainly our political environment as well. The other thing I will add, and you write commercial leases all the time, and better than I do about this. The other option you could do, frankly, is draw down the tenant's security, and then there's an obligation on the tenant to replenish that, and at least it gets you over the next few months. The issue here is no one knows how long this is going to go on. Is there going to be a second wave? Is it going to get, when it starts snowing out there, these restaurants aren't going to have outdoor seating. How is it going to go on for another 3 months? When's there going to be a vaccine that's readily available to the masses? So there's so much uncertainty that there has to be a degree of communication. There has to be a partnership. As you said, the landlords have to listen to the tenants and vice versa. They each have their obligations. And frankly, unfortunately, I think things can get a little worse before they get better.
Oh, so the bottom line is New York is the greatest city in the world. New York is going to come back. I think it's just going to take longer than before. And you mentioned marathon before. We're in the middle of a marathon. We're doing it on our knees, crawling backwards. So it's going to take a little bit longer, but we will get there. There's no question about it. So, along those lines about, New York City. So it's a classic line from the movie. It starred Sir Laurence Olivier and Dustin Hoffman. It was called The Marathon Man. And it was really, the line was that of a question. And it was Laurence Olivier as he's extracting without any Novocaine or gas, teeth unwillingly of Dustin Hoffman. And he kept on saying the line, "Is it safe?" Had to do with the plot of the movie. So, and Tony Soprano on the opposite end of the spectrum once told his son AJ, invest in real estate. God isn't making any more of it. So with that crazy preface, behind us, any thoughts as to whether it's safe right now to invest in New York real estate?
Well, you just segued into it with your last comment. So I want to frame my answer within that. I'm bullish like you. I'm bullish on New York City. I was born and raised in the Bronx, in case you couldn't tell by the accent. And, us New Yorkers, we're tough. We're resilient. We came through 9/11, people after 9/11. No one's ever going to live down in Fidei. No one's coming back. Who's going to want to live in such a cluttered environment? Well, we came back. We came back from Sandy. We came back from the Great Recession. There's always steam pipe leaks. There's always water main breaks. We come back from it all. We're very resilient, and no one should ever underestimate a New Yorker or the resolve of New York.
There's no question.
I remember when I first got into the business, I heard Jeff Corral speaking from Newmark, obviously. And he said, if you could hold on to New York City real estate long enough during times like this, per se, then there are no mistakes. And one of my mentors, Norman Buchbinder, obviously a very close mentor to me and the founding member partner of our company, told me early on that everyone needs a place to live and work, right? It's like, that's what you need, a place where you hang your hat, and you need a place where you can go to work. And I know trends are changing in the office environment, but we'll get to that later. The other part is, Manhattan's an island, unlike LA or Phoenix or Scottsdale, Arizona, where you could sprawl. New York's an island. It's a vertical city. It's going up. It's not like it's going to sprawl out. Yes, there's development in the boroughs, particularly in Brooklyn lately, but it's a vertical city. So, New York will unquestionably come back. The pandemic has caused an exodus in the city, a temporary exodus, hundreds of thousands of people leaving. We have an assemblage on 19th and 8th right by Google. People like, well, listen, I've been living at home for 5 months. We don't have to be back till July. I'm going to save $30,000. Love living here. I'll see you next year. So it's caused a huge exodus from the city. Offices are at 90% vacancy. Only, back in August, the numbers were 8% occupancy. I haven't seen the September numbers, but I'm assuming they tick up September, October.
But not as much as anyone thought. And listen, I'm sitting here, I'm out in the bubble out on Long Island, and I haven't been going to my city office. And the reality is, I said, I'm a guy who's a schmoozer. I go out, I entertain, I throw some parties, and the reality is I'm hurting the economy not being there. I'll be back soon, but what? It's like, and I'm guilty. And
well, to that point, right? To that point, it's like people will come back eventually. So when will that happen? Obviously, but even before I get into that, I say, and I've been saying this for a while now, even before now, since the pandemic hit, we have two viruses. One is COVID, and the second is a political virus. We have a political virus that's anti-business, anti-landlord, incapable of managing, let alone a dilemma like this. Simple things like, not so simple, but the homeless crisis. Managing, our mayor has been, and our city council, and his comrades, I should say, in the city council, have managed to, reduce the quality of life in New York over the most robust upturn in our economy, in the history of our country. Since 2010, the economy's been going up, and yet he's mismanaged it. So can you imagine what's going to happen now that the tax revenues are down? 53% of all the revenues, tax revenues in the city come from real estate. Well, those are going to be reduced. And once that happens, you're going to have, social services like sanitation pickup. Our, city streets will get dirtier. The parks will be dirtier and less safe. And of course, crime is up significantly since they did the bail reform bill in January, and crime is up, violent crime, gun violence up 93%, and petty larceny is up as well. So I think to get back to your question, I digress a little bit. I'm passionate about the political situation.
2021, you'll be a happier guy because he won't be in office then.
Right, exactly.
We'll leave it at that.
Hopefully, vote in someone that's a little more center.
Yeah.
Anyway,
one point that you said about, New York coming back, we're resilient 9/11, back then, we used to, it was when I was on the other side of my prior real estate life, we used to own 60 Broad Street. Okay. And I had to, and everything was shut down south of 14th Street. And the way I was able to get down, I walked down, I bought a pair of sneakers. I was out, before I walked down, I was in my office up on 54th and 6th. And I walked down to the tip of Manhattan and as I was walking down and the closer and closer I got down to the Wall Street area, I grabbed my heart and it was like, oh my God, the devastation. The dust, which was cement, okay, from a World Trade Center. And it was like, you sat there going, it's going to be a long haul. And if you in that moment, I was like, oh my God, it's just going to take a very long time for it to come back. And it came back a hell of a lot sooner. Okay?
And to that,
because of resiliency, because of the passion, because of who we are. It will happen, but unfortunately, it's just going to take time. Is what it comes down to. New
York City is the epicenter of culture, theater, food. Once Broadway art, museums. Once Broadway comes back, and once people could start going to bars and restaurants at will, which means until there's a vaccine, which is available to the masses, and the 63 million tourists start coming back to also spark our economy a little bit. Things will get back to normal. But your question was, is it a good time now? So most sophisticated, some less sophisticated real estate people like myself knew that, or at least believed that the peak of the real estate market hit in like 2018. And a lot of people, whether they're small people like me who liquidated some of their personal assets, become liquid. A lot of these large REITs liquidated assets as well. So there is a ton of money sitting on the sidelines these days, just a ton of money, right? Because everyone kind of knew the peak was over. No one could predict the pandemic and something to this degree, but everyone saw we were on the downside of the graph. So there's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines. Another 12 to 18 months. Banks don't want to be in the real estate business. There'll be a lot of opportunity to exchange notes. There'll be a lot of opportunities to get assets at much lower prices than have been available for at least the last 6-7 years. And to the point, New York City will come back, because I think anyone that knows New York knows it will come back. So I think the timeline is more like 18 to 24 months when those opportunities are there and people do start reinvesting significantly.
It sounds like 2009, 10, and 11, where a lot of people, there was a redistribution of wealth. Certain people, like myself included, because of what we lost in Newark, I became, exaggerating the point, a newly appointed member of the middle class. There are a lot of people who are in that middle class who are going to be quite comfortable in a few years because the stress breeds opportunity. So we'll see what happens there. So I painstakingly try and stay away from politics, but the next question may get your blood percolating, given part of your last answer. So there's a song called "How Low Can You Go?" It was performed by the rapper Ludacris. He's also one of the Fast and Furious stars, also the legendary Chubby Checker from the 50s. And it came to mind a few weeks back as to where development in New York City is going. It was, I had this case of Yogi Berra, deja vu all over again. It was like an Amazon-like experience where I'm taking my ball and I'm going home when, the owners of Industry City in Brooklyn, just, they had very ambitious development plans, at Sunset Park in Brooklyn. And, and it was going to create a lot of jobs. And basically due to, sorry to say it, political opposition, they withdrew. So, it's sad. So, I guess I want to ask you, can you expand on this development, or maybe a better way of me asking the question, the lack thereof?
Well, listen, unquestionably, our local elected officials, our mayor, and even our state senate are anti-business, anti-landlords, right? I mean, there's no question about that. The AOCs and her socialist comrades, play on the fears of the middle class as well as our president. The extreme right and the extreme left play on the fears of people. But the majority of people, especially in this city, are in the middle. They're liberal when it comes to social issues. They want a better education for their kids. They want their kids to be safe. Clearly defunding the police is not the answer. I haven't heard one of these politicians speaking about a plan for economic recovery. It's all defund the police. And how's that turning out for this city? There has to be police reform, and we have to really dig into systemic racism. I think that's one of the good things that's going to come out of the pandemic. People have had time to focus on it, but also, groups like the EDC, Economic Development Corp. I have friends that worked in EDC for decades, frankly. They would admit that they blew the rollout for Amazon. Instead of going grassroots, and that's really what these AOC and people are doing. They're going grassroots. They're organizing at a grassroots level. Well, EDC didn't go around to the community and say, hey, you know what? Amazon is donating millions of dollars into your public school system. So all the kids in grades 3 to 6 are going to learn how to program and learn how to code. They didn't get into the fact that there's going to be not only the thousands of jobs of these engineers making $125,000, but there's going to be thousands of jobs that come in at the local coffee shop for baristas and things like that. It's like they didn't get into that. And they didn't even talk about the tens of billions of dollars in additional tax revenue that'll go to help the infrastructure and transportation in that community. So
they didn't play the game.
They didn't play the game, but it's right. They didn't play the game, but you have to go grassroots. You have to organize, and they didn't do that. So that then led a void. The AOC came in and said, oh, they're going to kick everyone out of your neighborhoods and get gentrified. And there's something to be said for that, but there's a way to do both, right? There's a way to somehow integrate corporate business, especially a business like that that's going to enhance the community. As I said, as tax revenue decreases now, we're going to be in a significant problem. This administration wants to talk about helping the homeless, et cetera, and quality of life issues. But the fact that you have people out in the streets for months and months and months not getting the help that they need, some that are menacing the neighbors in our community, they're not capable of managing. So these local politicians don't understand the economic benefits. I don't even think AOC knew how many tax dollars were coming in from that deal, right? So I think so what can we do? What can we do as individuals?
Yes, I want you to be Winston Wolfe from Pulp Fiction, where his mantra being "I solve problems."
Well, yeah. So absolutely. So listen. I either think you have results or you have excuses, right? And the one way to get around this is we really have to get engaged. We really have to re-engage. I was, I co-chaired the Union Square Partnership. I was chair of a community board and all that, but I've been getting so organized lately, introducing people that are running for mayor, getting involved with the police precinct, getting involved with the community, organizing groups again. You have to remember, the Union Square Partnership was the first. I think there's 76 bids at this point, give or take 1 or 2 in all 5 boroughs. Union Square Partnership was the first one. And why were these bids created? Right, is to create safety and quality of life and cleanliness. Right, that was their core mission. Is still a core mission. Now, a lot of bids like Union Square, they may not have security, but they're marketing, they're promoting, they're trying to help lease up the stores and vacant stores in the area. But the fundamental reason why the bid started was to make the neighborhoods clean and safe again. So we have to get out and organize. Sitting around and just watching things and being ambivalent, those days are over. We have to get re-engaged. We have to vote, and we have to go for whether you're Republican or Democrat. I don't really care. You need someone that's in the middle, a moderate. We really have to start listening to each other again.
Well, it's enough of the bipartisan, because I feel like we all need to go to Times Square, as "Why Can't We Be Friends" plays in the background, and that we all do give a virtual group hug from 6 feet away and sing "Kumbaya." But I don't think that's happening anytime soon. But we do. The point is, we need to work together. MLK said we all came in on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. And so I'm going to flip that. Let's take a little bit more of a positive approach. So in the Kevin Costner movie, Field of Dreams, he kept on hearing this voice, if you remember, and it was, "If you build it, he will come." And so if there was one thing that you could build so they come, and, let's say primarily tenants really, what would it be? what's the magic sauce, so to speak, or if there is any?
Listen, I think let's break this into two categories, right? Let's break it, because I do a little bit of both. I think we have to break into residential, right? So how do we attract residents? How do we get them into our parks? And how do we get commercial tenants into our properties? Of course, there's other areas of real estate sales and office leasing, but I'm just going to talk about the resi and the commercial. One would say I'm a jack of all trade and master of none. But
Master of some, at least. Come on.
But here's some of the problems, I've seen, right? When I first got into the industry, it's not even a matter of time. How do we improve our industry, right? So when I first got in the industry, it was around Thanksgiving, right? And so the weather was changing, and I would start just going out and trying to find apartments for my friends' kids, little studio apartments in the village. And I'd call up the agent, and they'd say, all right, meet me here at 12 o'clock. Me and my friend's kid are standing in front of the apartment for not 12:15, 12:20. The guy finally shows up, we're freezing, and he says, oh, I don't have this apartment, but I have that apartment. Right? So the old bait and switch. So I was like, no offense, but I thought lawyers were the lowest form of humanity before that. Then I realized maybe brokers are even worse, right?
We're all near the bottom of the totem pole of real estate life. Okay.
So I mean, just the whole attitude of the residential, that small segment, I think we could certainly help. And on the commercial side, I think there's still an arrogance. I remember when I first got into the business, I would call some of the big name brokers, and frankly, they wouldn't even return my call, right? And I'm like, wow, that's kind of weird. I may have something to offer them, or I may have a question. So what's the solution, right? How can we help to improve our industry? What's the magic sauce? I think a couple things are, one, sharing information. Information is readily available these days anyway. I think we've gotten a lot better as an industry on both the residential and commercial side, working together, It's like no one gets the deal done unless we're working together to get the deal done, right? Join revenue committees, get involved, get organized. I've been sitting on the revenue residential rental committee and the revenue retail committee for a long time now, for probably 10 years. And we've established basic codes of conduct for people in our industry, how to behave. And I think at the very minimum, we have to have minimum standards for people in our organizations, our industry, to really improve as an industry.
Hey, could you just help me resolve this issue with the landlord work letter?
Why don't you come back later?
Okay.
Hey, can you help me with this letter of intent?
Not now.
Hey Rich, can you please help me with this good guy guarantee language?
Not now. There should be a better place for my brokers to get these answers.
Now there is. Leasing Reality. Master your leasing domain. This podcast is powered by Leasing Reality. Tough negotiation? Invest in your career, whether you're an aspiring, emerging, or seasoned commercial real estate professional, by mastering the preparation and negotiation of a letter of intent and the business aspects of a lease from both the landlord and tenant perspective. Watch, listen, and/or read Leasing Reality's content at your own speed. Learn more at leasingreality.com.
You've mentioned this in different ways a few times and just once again, not being politically, but when the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act came out, in the summer of 2019, let's just say, for the sake of conversation, that it was well intended, okay, and there needed to be change, and a lot of it was brought about by a few bad apples on the landlord side. But the reason why it got passed was passion. Because grassroots, because of the Tuesday bus rides up to Albany, when some of the alphabets, they weren't well represented up there. And then what the legislators saw is all of these people who wanted change. that's when I grew up. I grew up in the 60s. I'm 8, 9 years old with 13 channels, and I'm just seeing in 68 all the change of people who wanted it to be changed. And when I went around last fall lecturing on, because I rewrote the leases for revenue on the free market side, residential, and I was doing presentations, everyone was like bewildered by what I was telling them. I go, well, you know what? Do what they did in the 60s and get involved. You want change, you want to make a difference in our industry. No offense, shut up, okay, and get involved. Join the committee. It's exactly what you're saying, okay? And you need to do that, because otherwise, it's easy to throw darts, okay? And you need to be involved, okay? And you get involved and things happen. Listen, knowledge is what it's all about, and that's the way I think we're going to do a hell of a lot better. And you answered actually part of the question already, but when I looked at your website, you have about 25 retail listings available, what seems like about 100 residential listings up there. Playing off a song by Bob Marley, the reggae legend, okay, in order to help accelerate the leasing of these spaces from a marketing perspective, how do you stir it up? And in the words of Steely Dan, great Hall of Fame band, get these prospective tenants to sign in stranger.
Right. So obviously you did your homework, right? We control a vast majority of what we do are family-owned properties. We do some second family brokerage as well. We control about 1,900 residential units and a couple hundred commercial units. Our sweet spot is really Chelsea in the Village, but we do have some assets on Madison Avenue as well. So to give it some context, in 2000, ours is typical of brokerages our size, right, or landlords our size. In 2008, 2009, during the Great Recession, I had about 30, 35 vacant units, which is about 0.5%, 2% vacant units. As I sit before you today, I have 193 vacant units, right? 10%. There was a report that just came out. I was reading Gary Mallon's report. It used to be City, whatever it is now, right? It's like there's 5% vacancy now, which is the largest it's ever been since they've been keeping stats, which he acknowledges in there is probably, he doesn't say half, I'm going to say probably half the number of vacant apartments. Because if you're a landlord and you have a dozen studio apartments in a building, you're not going to market all, you're going to market a couple at a time.
Exactly. Right? You don't want to show that level.
Right. So that's probably, that 5% is probably closer to 10%. I know other landlords about our size, other similar family businesses, are about 10% vacancy. So how do you attract people? Well, if anyone goes onto OLR Streeties, you'll see over 80% of all listings on the residential side are no fee. Owner pays or no fee. So there's no tenant or no person looking for an apartment out there that's going to pay a fee. So immediately this landlord has to suck up that 1 month's fee. Obviously lower rents, rents are down. They were down 12 to 15%. I think they're probably down closer to 15 to 20% at this point. And they're going to continue to go down lower, frankly. And what we're doing and what I'm instructing the other families to do and what other landlords are doing is writing off the next year. Forget the next year. Let's just create cash flow in the buildings. Let's just lease them up for whatever number, right? And let's just get cash flow and see where we are next year and we could revisit. I'm talking about deregulated market rent.
Yeah, no, understood.
So that's number one on the residential side.
But you know what? You're taking a position that not a lot of landlords, and not everyone can afford this on the landlord side. You're taking the position that having vacant space is like going to a drive-in movie theater by yourself in a taxi cab with the meter running, and you and the cab driver aren't wearing masks. It makes no sense. You'd rather have a good percentage of something than 100% of nothing that comes with that vacant space. And as long as you're not committing to the long term, which you're not generally on residential, okay, then okay, you suck it up, and it's gonna be better in 2022, hopefully.
Right. Right. And listen, I should say everything I'm speaking about when it comes to real estate is only Manhattan. Yeah. Right? Primarily south of 96th Street. So I have no knowledge, and I'm not an expert at all in the boroughs. So what I'm speaking about is really Manhattan real estate, predominantly south of 96th Street. And also landlords, frankly, that are low leverage. If you just, built a rental building in, last year, you finished in the last couple of years, it's not quite as easy a conversation to just have cash flow for next year. I'm talking about long-time holders like us that are low leverage that could afford, let's just get through the year, get enough money in to keep it running, pay the taxes, maybe take a couple dollars out, but probably have a cash call anyway. But if you just built the building, that's some of those assets that are
you may be
available.
giving that building back, unfortunately, if you just built it.
Right, exactly. So let's move on to the commercial part, right? I'm about to sign 2 leases, which are the first 2 leases I'm doing post-COVID or during COVID, right? And they're small leases, little deli, right, little restaurant. But back in June, I think we could show again back in June, legally, we could start showing properties, whether it was residential or commercial. It was June 22nd, but don't quote me on the date. But anyway, there were a lot of low-hanging fruit, a lot of people coming out of woodworks. I just want to do percentage deals. And that's not really what we were looking for as a landlord. But lately, in the last couple of months, there's real tenants out there, name brand tenants that if I mentioned, anyone would know. So what are we doing? We're structuring our deals, at least. I mean, there's many ways to do it. I speak to brokers, and I'm friendly with many brokers. I like sharing information, and my friends in the industry share information with me, right? I mean, there's a base rent, there's percentage deals that happen. The way we've kind of structured it is a really low rent in year 1, right? And then a little bit, a bump up, not 3%, but a bump up in year 2. And by year 3, we're looking at pretty much close to 2019 numbers.
Yeah.
The assumption that in 3 years, if this isn't in our rear view mirror, we're all going to be in a lot of trouble, right? Yeah. So that's really what we're doing on the commercial side. And frankly, because of our position with low leverage and long-time holders, we've never been the landlords looking for squeezing the last penny or dime out of for the rent. We're more interested in getting good security. Real estate's about one thing, right? Managing risk, right? So we have to manage our risk. And that's a little more complicated these days with the security. And good guy, very rarely will we get 6 months these days. It happens, especially if it's a startup, but most tenants that have been around, have a few locations, are not going to pay 6 months security. So
it's what you can get on the good guy guarantee, and that's a whole nother
how you build it, et cetera. Obviously, you know more about that than I do. I'm just a lowly broker.
Oh yeah. It's a new world out there. So I want to talk about retail, and I'm going to do it in the context of the Netflix movie Studio 54, the documentary, and Ian Schrager. Some of the lines that stuck with me from the movie were about his and Steve Rubel's passion, and this is the quote: introduce the idea that anything could happen, and also about capturing energy. And during the pre-COVID days, when it came to dry use retail, food and beverage, and event space, a great deal of the success of these spaces came from what I like to call the Jimmy, as in Jimi Hendrix, the Jimi Hendrix experience. Have you ever been experienced? Yes, I have. And that's part of the fabric of New York. Why is New York so great? Other than the architecture and the vibe, it's because of the culture, the food and beverage, the restaurants, etc. So putting that long-winded preface, aside, do you think that there's some hope that these spaces will be able to, once again capture the energy, with all these, the social distancing mandates and the like?
Sure. So, I mean, let's just go back pre-COVID for a minute so we could frame this conversation, right? Retail was already going through a transformation, right? So why was that? Why was retail on the decline or going through a transformation? I would say there were 3 reasons. One, it was the end of a natural cycle. The cycle had been going up for 8-9 years already, right? And so it was just the end of a natural cycle, which happens every 8 or 9 years, right? There was also a change in trends. People aren't wearing suits and ties to work anymore. They're getting dressed like you and I are. Or the tech kids are all wearing jeans and t-shirts. Different trends in fashion as well, right? And third, of course, is the biggest reason is the Amazon phenomenon, right? You don't need, now with online shopping, you don't need 10 stores in New York. You could have 1 or 2 locations, and you could integrate e-commerce into that bricks and mortar shop. The word experiential is thrown all over the place, right? You have an experiential experience within that shop too, and people may come and look at it, but they could shop online, etc. So retail was already going through transformation before COVID. 40%, this is according to Cushman & Wakefield, readily available information, 40% of all transactions, once again, the island of Manhattan in 2018 and 2019 was some sort of QSR restaurant, right? Quick service restaurant, 40% of every transaction. And then I would say, this is my stats, I would say another 5 or 10% was some sort of fitness. So you have close to 50% QSR and fitness. What are the industries hit hardest? Some of the hardest, obviously airlines, tourism, special events, but right in there is fitness and restaurants. So you have 50% of all tenants that traded and did deals and transacted in the last 2 years. They're now under the most duress, right? It's not an easy situation for anyone. So now these tenants, some are not going to survive. As I said, it's going to get, as we get into the winter, perhaps a second wave, things are going to get worse before they get better. We've been through this before. The vacancy rate, according to Cushman & Wakefield, again, on the retail side was 25%. Didn't mean that 25% of the stores were vacant, but 25% of the retail stores in Manhattan were available for lease, right? I think those numbers are going to go up to over 30%, probably 35%.
I'd be happy if it was only 30%.
Right.
That's a sad thing to say.
I think the reality is looking at 35, maybe even as bad as 40%. Now, that's a big problem, right? That's the commercial. So I'm sorry. So that's that. So New York City, as we said before, it's the epicenter of culture. It will come back. These tenants will come back eventually when there is a cure, when there's a vaccine. The restaurants will have a different. I think those sectors, when people are coming back in the offices, I think the restaurants may have a different name. There may be another fitness fad going on, but Pilates, yoga, who knows, hot yoga, core power yoga, whatever, who's a great tenant of ours on A Street. But they're all, I think they're all going to come back. They may just be different names, but vacancies could be up. And that's why I think leasing's also coming up now, because experienced retailers or restaurants realize if they get in now, they're going to have a great lease in 3 years when this is behind us. So a lot of people are trying to take advantage of that opportunity.
And hopefully it will. Listen, as it relates to all the restaurants that are closing, and this is I wouldn't even call this a silver lining. The ones that do survive, there's going to be less competition because there's going to be less restaurants out there, and it'll make it a little bit easier. And hopefully at some point in the extremely near future, we're going to be at 50% and 75% indoor dining, but we'll see what happens there. So I'm going to ask you another semi-serious question playing off of the Studio 54 documentary. And one of Ian Schrager's lines was disco bred inclusion. And so in commercial real estate, where unfortunately there's a dearth of inclusion when it comes to professionals of different colors, there's too many people who look like you and me. And there's definitely a lack of women in the industry as well, severe lack, especially at higher levels, but for some of the true rock stars in the industry. How can we better promote inclusion in the industry?
Well, listen, it's obvious, right? When I go to a real estate event, I would feel like I'm in a Wonder Bread commercial, right? I mean, especially in commercial, it's predominantly white male. Resi a little bit different, more female, totally. More minority. It's a little bit more diverse, if you will, right? So it's a problem that the industry's been dealing with, and I've been speaking to my friends about this for a long time now, particularly my Black friends, and I've come up with really 3 solutions on how to resolve this, right, for our industry. One is we have to remember, for small firms like us, right, it's like our firm is as integrated as anyone. The small local firms, I think, reflect the communities which they live in. We're extremely integrated. And we have to remember that change is incremental. This isn't going to happen right away. Real estate, like any other business, it's all about money. So how do we get And the other part in our industry, unlike law, where you have to, if you want to become a lawyer, you have to go to law school, pass the bar, right? Or if you want to work on Wall Street, you have to pass the Series 7. The barriers to get into our industry are very low, right? It should be very accessible. You'd spend a couple dollars to get your license, takes a few hours, 80 hours, 70 hours, 80 hours, whatever it is these days, right? So the barriers to get in our industry are much less than many, many other industries. So it should be very accessible to everyone, right? Everyone. But I don't think a lot of individuals, minorities, even Caucasian males, females, even realize that you could have a career in real estate. I don't think that that's well known in high school and in college. When you're in college, you want to graduate, you want to make some money. Goldman's offering you a boatload of money, or if you're a lawyer, law firms offering you money. Real estate, the barriers may be low, but there is no initial salary for the most part, unless you go into management or something, right? You're not, whether you go into residential or commercial brokerage, you're not going to make a whole lot of money you may not make a penny your first 3 months.
Which is a problem the way it's set up.
Right, exactly. So hence, how do we rectify this, right? So one is, it involves money. It involves firms investing to create a fund, right? To invest in young minorities to get a base salary or a decent draw. Now, I'm not saying this is fair. As a matter of fact, it isn't fair. But, in order to get minorities up to the starting line equally with the white male, we have to invest in this, and we have to put our money where our mouth is. And we have to give them, an equal opportunity to get to the same starting line and finish line as we do. And that's going to require money from large firms to invest in that. And, it may not be a popular thing for your listeners, but that's the reality. If you really want to walk the walk and talk the talk, we're going to have to invest money. Firms are going to have to invest money and make it so that we equally could invest in the diversity, and equally so people could get to the same starting line at the same point. So one is the money part, right? We have to invest in it. Two is we have to educate and network. Right? Like I said before, most people in high school or college don't even know you can have a career in real estate.
Education, knowledge, the power of equality.
Right. And just getting out there and networking and socializing outside of our usual network. There's an old saying, birds of a feather flock together. Well, we got to go to like the New York Real Estate Chamber, which promotes diversity. We have to go into these sectors, into these organizations, or, into these groups that are already organized, and get the information out there and educate people that you could have a really good career where you're your own boss. You can make your own hours and you can have a really good career. We have to educate everyone. And this isn't just minorities. I mean, we are talking about minorities now, but this is just getting it out there. Like, real estate can be a great career for people to go into, right? But getting back to minorities, that's a factor we have to include too. And finally, mentorship. Right? So there's money, there's networking and education, and there's mentorship. Anyone, I'm sure, I know I had my mentors, I'm sure you had your mentor. Anyone who's somewhat successful or very successful will locate one person that they can say, was their mentor. They opened up doors for them, they could answer questions, they could grapple with that the younger person may not be able to answer, but their mentor could answer, and they could accelerate their careers. So arranging a mentorship program, once the people are in the industry, once the minority, the Black person, Spanish, whoever it is, woman, whoever that person is, needs a mentor, and to get those set up so they could do for them what our mentors did for us.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, we're involved in the community and doing that. We do, as a firm, a lot of educational marketing. But, from the standpoint, listen, last summer I had, not this one, 19, I had 22 interns work for me for our startup, Leasing Reality. Not to give a shameless plug, but, a major portion of the content that's on there is for free. Okay. And it's just, if someone just spent time on that alone, they would have a lot of knowledge. I think it would excite them, but at the same time, they'd have a lot of knowledge that a lot of brokers don't have. Okay. and as to the way the lease works and the business works. And, and it's important to be mentors, there's no question about it. So listen, right now with the advent of Zoom and everything, I'm doing a lot of, presentations. I'm trying to work on getting some of the high schools involved and some of the PTAs involved along the lines of what you're saying, because the bottom line is we need talent in this industry. It's like, not that we're dinosaurs, but, the bottom line is, listen, I'm 61 years old. I'm generally the biggest child in most conversations, but that's not the point. We need to get more young talent in this industry. And part of the reason why, it's very hard when you're going in commercial broker and you're getting a draw of that the first year, and then whether or not it's going to have to be paid back or not. The ones who survive the first few years and get through the pain are the ones who ultimately do well. But a lot of reasons why they can is because, their parents, like me, they live out in the suburbs and they always know they're going to have a roof over their head. Okay. Which is not fair to the minorities, which is not fair to, to a lot of people. One of my prior guests, and it was said sort of somewhat in a different context, but Gene Spiegelman was just an absolute rock star in the industry and a great guy. Okay, worked for Cushman Forever, ran it at a national level, and now he moved to Ripco. He said part of the reason why he was able to, do well in retail initially, it wasn't about who you knew. It wasn't about belonging to the country club, which to a certain extent in office, it helps. Okay. Retail is that, especially at, national level or regional level, a lot of the people running retail at these tenants, they're regular people, they're mensches that, and it's a lot easier to make the connection. As long as you have that passion, you have the knowledge, you have the ability to string syllables together and make that connection. So, listen, I think we can turn it around as to the lack of inclusion, but it's, I think you're so on point, knowledge, mentorship, and then, some of the bigger firms spending some money, or even some of the small firms invest. You don't need 10 brokers making nothing. Get 3 or 4 and give them something. Right. Absolutely. No question about it. So, I don't know if a lot of people in our younger audience remember this movie, but it was called Cool Hand Luke. It starred Oscar winner Paul Newman, and it was groundbreaking. It was anti-establishment. It was filled with symbolism. And the American Film Institute said that this line was the 11th most memorable line ever. And what it was is what we have here is a failure to communicate. Okay. And so when you're dealing, Bill, with Gen Zers, millennials, tenants, whoever, you ever find that, that problem arises for you?
I have I have 2 teenage girls, 14 and 16. Just about everything I say in our house is either politically or socially inappropriate. And my daughter's a cop. So they're absolutely, but I also, they weren't alive. And the people that are in their 20s now, teens, early 20s, mid 20s, they weren't around when New York City, during the 70s and 80s, when New York City was a cesspool, and it was a mess. It was unsafe. So, yes, systemic racism has to be dealt with, but, reducing the police department is not the answer. We have to have law and order. You have to have safety in order for a community a city to run efficiently, right? And you have to have the tax dollars to support all of these services. So just defunding the police is not an answer for how you're going to economically recover, right? There has to be thought. So I think there's a disconnect with some of that, simply because these Gen Zs also, everyone wins a trophy in soccer, not just the winners, but everyone gets a trophy. Life isn't like that, man. In life, you win some, you lose some. Not everyone gets a pat on the back. Good job. Here's a trophy for participating in life. And that's unrealistic expectation.
You learn from growth. Vince Lombardi had a line, it's not 100% applicable. I think it is. It's not how you fall down, it's how you get up.
Right, exactly. So, so I think there is a little lack of communication or a different view. Having said that, I'm an optimist. I'm a solutions guy. I am really optimistic about this generation. they are way more compassionate, understanding, and tolerant than my generation. They take on issues like social injustice, racism, climate control with such passion and fervor. Like, it really makes me feel confident in the future. We may not agree. I'm sure my parents said the same thing about rock and roll, right, man? It's like, you know, we were rebels with long hair listening to rock and roll, but we want to make a difference. And I see the same passion with this generation.
I agree. Amen.
I think they're more compassionate and understanding than we are. And we all have to, frankly, especially during COVID, be more accepting and tolerant, and really accepting of who we are, of any age, of any color. I think it's critical. And, you know, the most important thing of communication is not necessarily speaking. As a matter of fact, I would argue the most important thing in communication is listening. And we really have to start listening to each other more, especially during these times.
Oh, yeah. Listening is the lost art. That's all I'm going to say about that. So we're in the home stretch. We only have 3 or 4 more questions, Bill. So John Cleese, who is the great British comedian known for co-founding Monty Python, he once said, you don't have to be the Dalai Lama to tell people that life is all about change. So remarkably, in your, 40-something or 50-something year, you've changed a little bit. How have you changed over the past, 9 months or so?
Well, I would certainly say I've become more tolerant, right? I'm impatient. I want results now. My world is no gray. It's either black or white. You either have excuses or you have results, right? So I've learned to be a lot more patient and tolerant. I try not to sweat the little things. As you said earlier, and you said it really well, I use that line all the time. This is a marathon, not a sprint. It's like every day is like Groundhog Day. They all feel like Mondays. You have to prioritize. Get to the things you can today. If you don't get to it, you'll get to it tomorrow. But prioritize what you have to do, and keep your eye on the future. Once again, things will get better. Remember, after the last pandemic in the Spanish flu in 1918, 1919, when the second one, what came next, right? The Roaring 20s. There is going to be a surge of creativity, an outpouring of intellectual capacity and creativity that we haven't seen in decades, right? Just like the Roaring 20s. So there will be great things coming forward after this. Everyone's all pent up. We all have pandemic fatigue, I think is an expression I've been hearing lately.
Yes.
But things are going to get better. And when they get better, they're going to be freaking great.
I love that. Even the empty glass is 3/4 full. I like your optimism, my friend. So there's this song in the play Hamilton by Lin-Manuel Miranda, and it's called History Has Its Eyes on You. So Bill, looking back, what would history say about how you've done?
Well, this was a great question. And I was, started to think about what would they say, getting deep. And we're moving. We're going to move apartments in the near future. I was packing stuff up and starting to organize stuff. And I went through my files. And for some reason, back in December of 1988, I don't know the reason why, but I was I was born 61, so I was 27 years old at the time, and that was 32 years ago, right? I wrote a eulogy for myself, and I keep a file, and I have it here, a file of quotes where I have these great quotes that I've acquired over years, and here was my eulogy that I wrote to myself. And so I'm going to be, I'm going to open myself up. I'm going to be vulnerable to you and my audience.
Wow, I like this.
I'm going to read what I wrote for my own eulogy when I was 28, 30 years ago, because I was moved how it still holds true to me today. When I die, I want them to say he lived life to the fullest. What I mean to say is that he squeezed every moment out of life. No matter the success or failure, victory or loss, it was all a contribution to him. He loved life, not love as a need or desire, but love in the sense of freedom. I want them to say he lived life true to his stand for who he considered himself to be. Did he have fears? Yes. Did he care if people liked him? Yes. Did he question himself? Yes. But I want them to say that his fears, questions, and considerations did not hold him back from truly expressing himself. For he had seen man,
Okay.
but he had seen man as not many people had. He had seen man as the possibility that man can be. He had seen man. He had seen man for the possibility that man could be, and he was moved. He was moved enough to shift his life around that possibility. He knew not everyone would accept this shift, but he also knew he had to be true to himself. Where he deeply inquired into the question of what are we here for? And the funny part was he did not care about the answer. He was more concerned with the question, for the question gave him the power to live true to his stand. Was he successful? Did he make money? He'll let you ponder these trivial points, for he no longer cares. All I want people to say is that he was loved, and is that he loved and was loved, and that his life was a contribution to others. For he knew this and had a complete and glorious life. So written 30 years ago,
Wow.
when I was 28 years old, there was not a word in there I would change. And I still get a little
Wow,
emotional.
that is incredible. Wait a second. I'm hugging you. Okay.
Virtual hug to you and your, I told you I was gonna open myself up.
Seriously, that was great. I have one more question. Screw it. I'm not even going there. Okay. That was so good. Let's end it on a high, my friend. I love that. By the way, what were you drinking that day?
Who knows if I was drinking or smoking? Who knows what the hell I was doing? I was 28.
That was wonderful, my friend. Seriously, thank you so much. I love the thoughts. This was a great conversation. Okay, very enlightening. Okay, and thank you for sharing that with us and opening up. I
You're
appreciate
welcome. And as I said, thank you, Larry. As I said at the beginning of this conversation, 3 goals. One was to have fun. I hope we did. 2 was to perhaps empower people along the way. I hope someone was somewhat empowered and perhaps they learned something as well. So that was the goal, and I hope I delivered. And it was really a pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity.
You did well, my friend. Kudos. We'll speak soon, okay? Thanks for coming in.
Take care.
Okay, take care, bud.
Please know that it would be greatly appreciated if you could kindly download, subscribe, rate, and review Real Estate Reality Check on Apple Podcasts by way of the episode page, podcast page, or rerealitycheck.com. The content of this podcast is intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to solicit business or to provide legal advice. Our listeners should not take or refrain from taking any legal action based upon the information contained in this podcast without first seeking professional counsel. Prior results do not guarantee future success. Are you on the search for dynamic legal representation for you and/or your business? Abrams, Garfinkel, Margolis, Bergson LLP's full-service law firm is dedicated to smart, practical, and cost-effective counsel, providing the highest level of legal services to its clients. The AGMB team primarily represents clients in residential and commercial real estate transactions, banking, brokerage, and mortgage compliance, as well as entertainment industry services. AGMB has offices located in New York, Long Island, and California. Learn more and visit agmblaw.com today.